there has been an alarming spike in the number of attacks against some in the Asian community.
I would be lying if I told you that, Black and Asian folks is just all this great peace and harmony all the time, because that's not true.
When something happens, a member of any community is harmed, the first thing everyone wants to do, of course, is place blame and find out who did something.
I think today we realize that both communities are facing the same challenge. We both face violence. We need to help each other out.
It's about how do we nurture trust? How do we build trust? My name is Eddie Zhang. I'm the president and founder of the New Breath Foundation. New Breath for me is hope and new beginnings. I came to the U.S. from Guangzhou, China at the age of 12 because my grandparents wanted me and my family to have a better life here in the United States. At the age of 16, me and two of the people that I associated with committed a crime of home invasion robbery that led to kidnap to commit robbery. And I ended up spending 21 years incarcerated. So I grew up literally from age 16 to age 37 in the prison system. When I was inside, once I was able to start getting educated and really have the opportunity to reflect on my actions, I was able to find my purpose in life, which is to serve the youth and the community.
I think 2010 is a pretty key period that happened within the Asian community, especially our elders in the Bayview district.
There was a lot of fear in the community. This video that went viral was this African-American woman, this Chinese woman on the bus. They had an argument. There was another incident. A Chinese woman was standing on the platform, and then this one young person would push this woman into oncoming traffic.
A lot has been targeted or really finger pointing to the African-American community, saying that they have been bullying the Asian community.
There's this phrase that was coined when they were talking about Asian Americans. They call us the walking ATMs. So what they're saying is hey, they got money. Those people got money. If you rob them, they would have cash, and it's like a walking ATM.
Eddie is someone who, like me, wants to see our communities come together and understand that we are better together versus being divided. Regardless of what narratives some people want to put out there about how we are as communities, sometimes people tend to want to blame whole races of people, whole communities, and that's the hard part about this work. I'm originally from Bayview Hunters Point, lived there early part of my years. Bayview Hunters Point is really the last place where you can find a good percentage of the Black population. It's about 20%. As most people probably know by now, we have less than 5% Black population here in San Francisco.
You see people who have called this place home when no one wanted to call this place home, when no one cared about this neighborhood, when the city wouldn't even recognize the need and the beauty in this community. Black people were here.
In the early 2000s, just a lot of immigrants, like Chinese immigrants, other immigrants, start moving into the Bayview.
It is very challenging. There's a language barrier. We can't communicate what's going on, and we do not know how to build bridges or reach out to them. So they felt like that we're a group of strangers coming in, that they feel like they're being displaced and they're being disrespected.
I've seen a lot that has happened. You can talk about it, you can cry about it, and we need to do those things, but what are we going to do to bridge the gap?
I think the first thing we started out was a multicultural youth leadership program. We need to create spaces for cross-cultural engagement. Right? We need to support our young people. We need to start doing more work with the African-American community, right, in that space. It goes back to what I learned from prison, is that we have to invest our young people, right, to give them the knowledge and the importance about, each other's history. How do we bring each other together and start building?
If we don't spend time together, if we try to avoid each other's communities, then it's easy for people to divide us and create their own narratives, and we have to work to change that.
We are celebrating together for the 13th year. And that's what it's about, coming together through thick and thin, through pandemics, through all. And that's what we do, right, Eddie?
This is our 13th year.
13, 1-3.
There can be a lot of times when you feel defeated because you might do so much great work, you know, and then something happens.
We need to have a moment of silence for our brothers and sisters from the Monterey Park, the Half Moon Bay.
It can't just be an event, right? It takes the long haul to really be able to affect the change that's needed.
We cannot let them win. That's why we will continue to celebrate our unity as communities.
So the worst thing we could do is turn against each other. The best thing we can do is focus on learning more about each other and coming together.
I'm going to do my best to make this world a better place. How can I continue to nurture trust so that we can continue to fight for our collective liberation and not individual liberation? I feel like there's hope.
Well, that was really amazing. For those of you who are just joining us, we are watching two videos that Daniel, our special guest, helped to produce with PBS. The second video we're going to watch is about Miss Pat and her story in Kingston, Jamaica, and Jamaica, Queens. So we're going to jump right in.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We have a special guest in the building, Miss Pat. Good morning.
Good morning, Miss Pat.
Good morning. Good morning. Happy to be here.
It's with great pleasure that we present the Pioneer Award to Miss Pat Chin of VP Records.
60 years, I'm doing the same thing. When the journalists come to interview me, they were shocked to see a Chinese woman in America selling reggae music. They didn't know that a woman can do music, but I'm the one that started long before Bob Marley even got popular. They always ask me, how do you spot a hit? I would say, not in the boardwalk, and not in the studio. The people on the street makes the hit. I was born in Jamaica many years ago. From my book, Miss Pat, My Reggae Music Journey, this is my mom. My mother was full Chinese, and my father full East Indian. Both sides of my family were immigrants.
The Chinese that came over to Jamaica in the 1920s to the 1930s, they really came for business. They opened up shops.
My parents opened a shop selling grocery to the community. Although I was Chinese, it didn't occur to me that I was different because we are first Jamaica. The kids would play together while the parents would be in the shop.
In many ways, the Chinese shop was a community center, especially in the rural areas.
It was ingrained in us that community was very important, because if we treat community right, we'll have a good, viable business. I think looking back, that's how I developed my skill of selling and knowing if I sell something that people love, they'll buy it. Music played a big role in Jamaica, because Jamaica is a very poor country. So we sing for everything. We sing when we're happy, we sing when we're sad, we sing when we're working. It gives us hope and gives us a good feeling of happiness. Producers would go upstairs. After they're singing, they would be able to cut the disc and they would run downstairs to get it played to see if the people like the record or not. During the 50s, Jamaican record was not played on the radio. It was just R&B 24/7. My store was the place where people gathered to hear the music.
Even Bob Marley came through, right?
Even Bob Marley came through when he first started. When he was about 16, 17, he used to pass by the store. He used the studio upstairs also. He wasn't a big star when he first was singing. Everybody sang like Bob Marley in those days. So when he became a hit, we had to brush off all the Bob Marley records because they were hot at that time. In 1962, we got independence from England, and it was a very happy time. That's where music started to bloom. We sang about what was going on in the country. Most of the songs were like a newspaper tell you about the poverty and the changes that they wanted to make. So we used songs to really demonstrate, not with guns, but with the words and the songs.
The 1950s and 60s is this real move towards imagining Jamaica as Black peasant space. So there's a little bit of discomfort in terms of how do the Chinese fit in to that. In the 1970s, there was economic issues as well. There was violence as well in Jamaica. A lot of middle-class Jamaicans started to leave.
We were very scared. A lot of business people were moving. So we decided to move. We came to New York in 1977. We had to just come with nothing. We rented a small space. We started the record store. We went 20 years backward because we were so successful in Jamaica. My husband was fascinated with the name Jamaica because it reminded him of Jamaica back home. 77, it was dominantly white neighborhood. Sometimes I was even ashamed to even talk because I did talk very deep patois because living in Jamaica, we all talk broken English. So it was hard for me to assimilate. But we was lucky because Caribbean people and Jamaicans supported us.
Miss Pat, what about being a woman in this business, right? Because look at you. How tall are you? 4'11"?
Yes.
4'11".
Not when she stand on her money, though.
Sometimes it was very, very hard for me as a woman because they would say to me sometimes, could I put on a man on the phone? But little did they know I spent 20 years on the counter in Jamaica, so I knew all the songs, the singers, the producers, the rhythms. I knew everything about music. This is such a beautiful occasion, you know. As I grew up, I learned that community was very important, was a big part of our DNA. Jamaica was so gifted in music. Jamaican music is really start from nothing, and they create music from nothing. It makes me very happy and proud that here is it. I'm part of that.
Well, both of those were so amazing. Daniel, would you mind just kicking us off by sharing a little bit about your role in creating those videos?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much for being here. First and foremost, thanks so much to Masami and Thor for inviting me. And Danya, it's such a pleasure to be in conversation with you. So yeah, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have worked with PBS. Goes without saying that, this would not have been possible without the work of many, many individuals. But I guess just for a little bit of context, so the organization that I work for sort of has two main thrusts. One is around kind of U.S.-China, advancing positive social impact in U.S.-China relations, and the other is around advancing Asian American inclusion and belonging through the lens of narrative change. And so basically, when we got started as an organization, we're still quite new. It was right around the time of the Atlanta spa shootings. And at the time, we were really focused predominantly on that first thrust on US-China relations. As that bilateral relationship soured, as we all are super aware during COVID, during the trade war, all of the rhetoric that led up to that 2019, 2020, we began to pivot and focus a little bit more on this connection between Sinophobia and what we were seeing as a linkage between kind of like anti-foreign sentiment and how that actually manifested in the treatment of Asian Americans domestically in this country. And we found a pretty strong linkage. And I think the spa shootings really sort of brought that really to the fore. And it was a fortuitous connection at the time because right around that period, that was early 2021, we were approached by PBS, who at the time had been working on this initiative called Exploring Hate, which historically had done a lot of work on racism and extremism, but predominantly focused on the Jewish American community. It had a very strong focus on anti-Semitism. And they were really looking at the time to broaden their content to reach other demographics that are outside of those auspices. And so we came in as sort of the subject matter expertise, and they came in as this distribution platform. And we created one series in the spring of 2022 that was called Belonging. That was the first co-production that we did together that was really telling the story of Asian American trailblazers across different industries and different sectors who are working within their communities to fight back against hate and show resilience in their communities. It was really exciting. We brought together some names that I think may be familiar to some of us: George Takei, the Star Trek actor, and Viet-Thanh Nguyen, the Pulitzer Prize-winning writer. And it was really, really exciting. We were excited about the series, and it did well. And I think when we were thinking about, do we want to keep collaborating and keep partnering going forward, one of the prevailing thoughts was, well, why don't we do something a little bit more edgy, I guess. It's sort of one thing to talk about profiles of contributions and the ways in which individuals have responded to hate, but I think it's a lot trickier to talk about interdynamics between communities of color, and not shying away from maybe some of the thornier issues that exist there. So I think, overall, there's really two main narratives, I think, when it comes to kind of communities of color and kind of historical relations. And I think one is that, kind of maybe comes from one particular audience, which is like these communities are always in conflict and tension. There's never going to be harmony. There's never going to be peace. And then I think the other is maybe overly optimistic, right? Is saying that, well, of course, we've held hands and sung together and chanted at rallies and have always been aligned in our struggles. And I think the reality, of course, is somewhere more in that murkier middle ground. And so that's kind of what we wanted to endeavor to do. And you all can sort of be the judge in terms of whether or not we succeeded in that goal, but sort of telling these stories in terms of interracial relationships that show the possibilities and the opportunities for allyship and solidarity, but also talk about some of those historical harbingers of where there have been tensions in the past. So that was kind of how this series came together. It came out in May 2023. And to finally get to your question, Masami, in terms of being a producer, I feel very grateful that the folks that I was able to work with came in with a lot of the technical expertise in terms of videographers in terms of how to set up shoots, in terms of how to do all the software, to do post-production editing. My role was predominantly in terms of research, storyboarding, finding those interviewees, conducting those interviews, and then providing feedback on the different cuts and the iterations that we got of the episode in its lead up to being launched and publicized. So that's kind of a little bit, my background is a little bit more predominantly as a writer, and so it was nice to be able to provide input into that part of the process, but also not be responsible for how to operate a camera, which I cannot. So better off in the hands of experts.
Totally. I mean, it takes a village. I did a laundry list of thank yous at the beginning of this event that we're having right now. So I totally understand where you're coming from, and think, it is a really important and nuanced topic that we should discuss. And I think that's why we were so excited to have you, is just to get a little bit in the hairy stuff. It's not always sunshine and roses. And so but it's very important to talk about how, we can be, stronger together, but then also the challenges. So I think that's actually a really good segue into my first question. So Asian and Black communities share many things. A path to equity that is a direct product of the civil rights movement, a shared history as refugees, survivors of war and genocide, slavery, and colonization. Yet we often view one another as more different than similar. So I'm wondering, how can we leverage our similarities, our shared background and history to foster deeper understanding, create solidarity, and better combat injustice? Easy question for the first one.
Easy question. Absolutely. Yeah. Just diving right in. I mean, we only got 45 minutes, right? We got to get to the heart of these things.
Yep, we do.
So I don't want to steal any of Danya's thunder, so I'll try to keep this relatively brief. But, I will say, I think, sort of emphasizing both sides of the equation here, I think there has been a very long-standing history of solidarity between Asian American and Black Americans, I think kind of dating back all the way to the late 1880s, when famous abolitionist Frederick Douglass actually spoke out against the Chinese Exclusion Act, and that was sort of one real example of calling for unity during this time when it was very clear that both communities were being oppressed in different ways, and sort of recognizing that and being willing to stand up for each other. That theme has come up a lot in history, from the Japanese American Citizens League in the 1920s, really advocating for the first time for affirmative action. That led to, of course, the landmark case around that time, which is now no longer, but that's a conversation for another time. I think probably most salient is the civil rights movement. Of course, you have very famous images of Yuri Kochiyama kind of holding Malcolm X after his assassination on stage. Very strong involvement with the Black Panthers. And then, of course, Grace Lee Boggs and her husband, James Boggs, who were great, incredible activists in the Detroit area for so much of their careers, working on interracial solidarity in that respect. And so I think, the civil rights era was a really, really important time. I think it gave the first kind of really broad spread understanding that there has this kind of consciousness in people's minds that there are these kind of historical and institutional barriers and systemic barriers to liberation, which not only affect one particular community, but actually affect all communities of color, and that it really takes working together to take any kind of meaningful stance against that. And so I think this kind of was really capped off with the movement for ethnic studies, which I think, of course, started with Black Americans and then eventually spread to include, Chicano studies, Asian American studies, a legacy and a history that is very much continuing up into this day in terms of how we're seeing that language packaged and used in state legislation for mandates for high school K through 12 education, as well as at the college level. So, there's a ton of really exciting stuff around that. At the same time, of course, there is still a lot of conflict and tension. And I think a lot of the big reason for that is around misunderstanding and a lot of distrust. And I think that's kind of what the first video was really getting at, this idea that you have immigrant communities moving into an area that has been historically Black, for instance, in the case of Bayview, Hunters Point, and just not being able to have the ability to, whether it has to do with language or culture, kind of reach out and understand why there would be some kind of unsavory feelings on both sides of that equation. And so I think one of the big kind of thorns and the wedge issues that I think we've seen especially play out during COVID and during this increased time of heightened tensions is around the model minority myth. This idea that, of course, it's a stereotype that generalizes all Asian Americans as sort of being model examples, and that their quote unquote success as a minority, comes at the expense of, having other minorities feel like they have to, be or act or perform at a certain level to also get that same recognition in contemporary society. When of course I think oftentimes the dual forces of, kind of anti-blackness and kind of systemic racism are at play and affect both of those communities. And so no matter when one feels like they can get a leg up, it's there's still a lot of oppositional forces that are kind of in there to oppress. And so I think kind of trying to bridge this to a close here, I think one of the big things that's come out, I think especially since COVID, are these kind of multiracial coalitions that are really working together to increase understanding again and to break down those barriers of distrust that exist. And so I can throw a couple examples in the chat, but there are really, really exciting examples in New York and of course across the country too that emphasize some of these ideas. Asians for Black Lives were huge during the George Floyd protests. The People's Collective for Justice and Liberation, Eddie Zhang's organization, which we heard about in the first episode, the New Breath Foundation. And actually one what's kind of exciting and I hadn't known about until recently, called Blazin' March, is this group of Black, Asian, kind of multiracial individuals who are themselves really involved in some activist work together. The last one I'll point out is also super, super exciting. It was they're called the May 19th Project. And that is kind of a New York Times, like sort of big expose kind of stemming from, I think it's called the 16/4 Project. It's sort of like in that similar vein, but really tells the story of Asian-Black relations over time. So I think those are some of the sort of exciting kind of developments in terms of how we can create more understanding in that space, is sort of bringing together these interdisciplinary coalitions. But super, super interested to hear other thoughts and ideas that Danya has as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. There's a lot that you shared that resonates with me. I'm a self-proclaimed historian. So the example of Malcolm X and Yuri Kochiyama is one of the first things that comes to mind when I think about Black and Asian solidarity and moments in history in which that relationship and dynamic has been really strong. I think you mentioned earlier, there are kind of like two extreme like examples across the spectrum. There are those who have pretty negative sentiments, think that there's little room or opportunity or hope for our communities to come together, bridge some of these gaps, and overcome misunderstanding and hate. And there are those who may be, overly optimistic, may not be considering the nuances. The history is both shared and separate, that has ultimately made both of our communities who we are today. And I think part of calling back to history is really finding that middle ground. Like what has happened before? What can we learn from instances and times in which solidarity between our communities has been strong, has lended to, both of us being able to overcome injustice, overcome struggles that we're facing. And something that really sticks out for me when I think about Malcolm X and Yuri Kochiyama's relationships is how they demonstrated and displayed curiosity and passion for each other's backgrounds, each other's identities, and the unfortunate violence that was plaguing both of their communities at the same time. Yuri Kochiyama was a child of Japanese immigrants, part of a generation that was rounded up by the American government and forced to live behind barbed wire in the Japanese internment camps. And her family actually, they took a trip down to Alabama and saw some of the destruction, the violence that was left behind by racial protests. The Birmingham church bombing as well. And I think, although it's unfortunate that the times that may feel most opportune for us to grow our solidarity might meet at this intersection of injustice and oppression, I do think that both Malcolm X and Yuri Kochiyama were able to really develop and deepen like their empathy for one another by seeing the parallels in what their people had faced and experienced, and coming together to expand their lens, expand their perspective. And I think that's also why the Black Panther Party really zoomed out and started to look at global imperialism rather than what is just happening in the U.S. and trying to understand Like, where are the synergies, where are the connection points between all of these systems globally, but all of these things that are also happening?
I love that. I think, Danye, one of the things that you pointed out to me as we were preparing for this conversation was just the example of like Eddie in the video and how his experience as getting incarcerated very young and growing up in prison is, an experience that is like resonant with your community. And so I think, that is even just one more example of like how the circles really overlap. So I think, in a similar vein, speaking a little bit more about the challenges, when in the second video, Miss Pat's family immigrated to Jamaica to take advantage of economic opportunity. Their shop ended up being this amazing community space where cultures could come together. And in America, a lot of Asians immigrate here for the same opportunities, but it doesn't always result in like a really amazing cultural collaboration. For example, sometimes Asian-owned businesses that open up in predominantly Black neighborhoods can leave Black patrons with an experience that's less than ideal, perhaps some sense of hostility or even criminalization. So my question is, what can we learn from Miss Pat's family about, their business and their ability to create a center of community?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's I think it's important just to say just to give a little bit of history on Miss Pat, and she was a really great interviewee, but she was very conscious, and I'll kind of share this with all of you too, is like she didn't want to emphasize the challenges. She didn't want to emphasize the struggle because she wanted her story to be one of uplift and hope and joy, and I think it very much was all those things. And so we were kind of in a little bit of a bind because she was our primary interviewee. It's her story that we're telling. We wanted to do well by her, but at the same time, I felt disingenuous not to mention some of the underlying things that maybe kind of like propelled for instance, her move from Jamaica to New York, which is in large part due to kind of the political and social unrest at the time. And so, as you mentioned, Masami, her wave of immigrants came mostly to pursue economic opportunity. It was a real big departure from previous waves of immigrants from Asia to Latin America who had been used predominantly as labor in the sugar canes and to supplement African labor. There was a lot of Asian migration as coolies during that time in the early 1800s all the way through the mid 1900s. But when Miss Pat and her family came, again, it was sort of a different lens. They were kind of seen as this business class. And those tensions really ramped up in the 1930s when Jamaica's economy stagnated. And as the professor in the second video mentioned, there was this really move back to Black peasant space. And so this idea that, we were Jamaica for Jamaicans, and sort of Chinese immigrants at that time fell into this weird divide where they weren't quite Jamaican, but they had lived, many of them lived in Jamaica for generations. And so what to do with those individuals in this space? And I think it's a very similar question to what we experience in the US all the time around some of these same issues. And so, once that the sort of seeds of that got planted, I think gradually the writing was on the wall to a large extent. And in the 1970s, when after Jamaica declared its independence, they just decided that it was a little bit too much of a risk to want to stay. Also because there was a great fear at that time of Jamaica becoming communist, which was it actually mirrors a lot of my own family history. My mom is Chinese, but she was born in Cuba. Actually, I don't know that I've shared this with either of you in our prep calls, but her family.
No, that's cool.
Yeah, her family ended up immigrating to America for really similar reasons. When Fidel Castro came to power, there was this great fear that they were going to see some of the things that were happening in China that propelled them to leave in the first place, and so they decided to come to America to seize a different kind of opportunity at that time. But I will say, sort of irrespective of place, I think what Miss Pat did super well for her community was creating that communal space. And she talks about it in a very fond way. When we did the interview, we were at her shop location in Jamaica, Queens, and it was just it had that same energy, the same energy that we saw her describing in the 1970s and the 1980s. Where it was just sort of a meeting place for people of all walks of life to come and enjoy something that they shared, which was this love of music. And it was really her passion and her fervor for the industry and for the medium that really resulted in its in the global phenomenon that we associate with reggae. I mean, it was in no small part through her own efforts. And so I think for a lot of people, it's a really inspiring story. Certainly not without its own pitfalls, but I will say there are also a lot of really great examples of these kinds of cultural collaborations as well. So I'll mention a couple of documentaries that I think are really instructive in this way. One is called Blurring the Color Line. The second is called Far East Deep South. Both of them concern actually Chinese shop owners, so business people who were living in the Deep South around the time of segregation and the civil rights movement, and the degree to which that kind of political energy charged the relationships and the friendships that existed in that space. And then the sort of the second kind of main thrust is this documentary called Sea Drift, which is about Vietnamese Americans who had come over, had fled Saigon during the war, and landed in Texas, of all places, where there was a large refugee population, and the degree to which they had conflict and tension with the local fishing community there over the course of the 1970s and 1980s, but who actually managed to build enough of a rapport and a relationship that they had a really combined communal response to, for example, what happened during Hurricane Katrina. And they were able to speak out very publicly against displacement and against the movement of both of their communities that had historically been redlined and that had historically been oppressed. So it's fascinating. I mean, all these things like so much come in waves. And I think we happen to catch this wave, similar to what the first episode mentioned around 2010, there was sort of this big spike in crimes. Obviously, we got it again during COVID in 2020. And those are the things that catch the headlines. Well, we very rarely see those instances of solidarity that exist in the interim. And again, too, it's just for all of these individuals in the activist space who are working constantly on these issues, to have something like this kind of sort of take attention away from the work that they're doing is really disheartening. Obviously, it's a true thing that's happening, but it really deflects from some of the other work that is often unseen.
Thank you so much for sharing. We talked a lot about kind of distrust, a lack of understanding, as really kind of driving hostilities and tensions between Black and Asian communities, not just in the United States, but elsewhere, where the Asian and Black diaspora have a visible presence. I'm curious to hear from you, as you've done a lot of work, you've been engaged with so many of these multi-racial, multi-ethnic coalitions, in the work that you do. What are some ways that we can work to nurture and foster more trust and understanding between our
That's the big question, right? It's a really good one, and I think it requires a lot of different aspects. I think kind of two big thrusts are sort of kind of preventative, and then one is sort of a response. And I think right now we're getting a lot, especially in the media, sort of this response. So like we an incident happens, we do these kind of anti-bias trainings, we do these bystander intervention methodologies. I think all of these things are super important and really crucial, but I think they miss the sort of the root of these problems, which really stems from education and exposure. And so I can talk a little bit about those two threads. So I think in terms of education, it's really important to have, I think, at least two, I'm sort of boiling things down a little bit, but two kind of main ways in which we can learn about experiences and individuals who are very different from us. And I think one of them has to do with contributions. So really the really positive, resilient stories of the ways in which communities have contributed to the fabric of American life, I think is an incredible way to see and recognize the work that's been done in communities that are outside of one's own. And I think the second really is outside of those contributions is thinking about those issues, those hard-hitting issues that have come up over time, whether it's through ethnic studies courses, whether it's through other forms of self-education, through reading. As a writer, I'm a huge proponent of kind of diverse reading lists. And so I think that kind of self-education is a really crucial piece of it. I think the second is exposure. And I think we really need to find additional opportunities to move outside of our own social work spheres and have more interaction with folks who are really different from us. And it's hard. I think it's increasingly hard in a time when, there are whole industries built around keeping our social spaces very sanitized and also like very insular, right? Where we're constantly fed a feedback loop of the same kinds of information and the same kind of opinions. Um, and I think Eddie is doing some really incredible work in that way in terms of the youth organizing, in just having these retreats where folks, like in some of those photos, are in these, sort of like cabins, these spaces that are outside of the fabric of normal everyday life, where they're able to brainstorm and make memories and have fun and build coalition together. I think that's such a crucial piece. And really working together, I think as much as possible, finding opportunities to engage uh, engage with issues and individuals and experiences that are outside of ourselves, whether it's through a collegial work environment, or whether it's through our own passion projects, whether it's the communities that we intentionally create outside of work and home and family life. Um, those are just some again, maybe easier said than done ways, but at least some starting points.
I love that. I think that's amazing. We can all engage in way more cross-cultural learning, and we put it at the top of our priority list. It's much more likely to happen. So my challenge to everyone on this call is to engage in some of that work. So I'm just being a little conscious of time. I know that we are already 2 minutes over. So we had another question for all of you, but if you have to, or excuse me, for our special guests, Daniel and Danye. But just being conscious of time, I think we just want to open up questions from the audience. So if anyone has any questions for Daniel or for myself or Danye, we want to open the discussion up. I know if you have to drop, you have to drop, but if you have anything, please go ahead and put it in the chat. I think more than anything here, we're all just big fans of cross-cultural collaboration. And so finding ways that we can be more relational to one another is really the goal here. So please, questions, comments in the chat, would love to see them.
Yeah, and I'm happy to stick around till the top of the hour if folks have things they want to ask. So
perfect.
And I think, if anyone does want to get in touch, feel free to share my information with Masami with anyone who's interested.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Daniel, you mentioned some resources, so I can, excuse me, pull those together and share them around as well. So if anyone is interested in doing some more of this amazing learning, you will have it at your fingertips.
There we go.
Thanks, Taylor.
For anyone who's still on the call, if you don't have a question, but would like to engage with us a little bit more, we'd love to just hear from you, as we've been talking about cross-cultural collaboration, and Daniel mentioned exposure being one of the ways that we can help to foster deeper understanding and trust. What are some examples that you all have seen where, Asian or Black cultural elements were kind of brought together in a fusion or exchange? A great example of this that I always like to use is Korean fried chicken, right? So Black American soldiers living in Korea during the Korean War, being able to share the rich culture of soul food with Korean people and creating what I believe is one of the best forms of fried chicken that we have, honestly.
I second that.
Agreed. We're all in unison here.
Yeah, we love Korean fried chicken.
Yeah. I mean, I think fusion food, cultural diplomacy is predicated a lot on food. This idea of culinary diplomacy, I think, is a huge sticking point, especially in cross-cultural relations. I mean, I think in some ways it could get co-opted, right? This sort of idea of, I remember even during the early days of COVID, it's like, love me, not my food, was kind of these refrains that happened when there was so much, hate that the community was experiencing, is that it's easy to sort of put particular elements of a a race or an ethnicity or a culture kind of like on a pedestal, while at the same time sort of like tearing down other aspects. And so, but nonetheless, I love food. I love fusion food. We joked about this earlier, but I think like mixed race people is a great cultural byproduct of this intermixing of cultures. So shout out to
We're
Masami.
here.
Yeah.
We take up space. Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree with you, Daniel. Like everything has so much nuance. Even all the positive things, you know, you'll have to do some thinking around them. So totally agree. Well, okay, I've been monitoring the chat and I appreciate all of the kudos. But it seems like no questions. So I think we'll just wrap this up. BTS, let's give a round of applause to Daniel and Danya. Thank you so much for being here. Daniel, thank you for sharing your expertise, your amazing videos. Danya, thank you for your deep insights, helping me prep for this and stretching me in ways that I didn't know that I could. And of course, to all of the team members who helped make today possible. So thank you everybody for joining and happy AAPI Heritage Month.
Huge thanks to you, Masami. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. It's really been a fantastic opportunity. So I'm just so grateful to share this with you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. And I'll be in touch with materials. Bye. Bye-bye. Cool. Good job.